Today I want to introduce you to a hypothetical person. Let's just call her very responsible. Like she's a John Bunyan character. Very responsible has done her research. She has a 3-month emergency fund. She has read every parenting book. She has checked the weather for the camping trip 6 days in advance. And she has already identified the nearest urgent care clinic, just in case. She has a plan A and a plan B, and let's be honest, she's working on a plan C. Now, is very responsible sinning? Not necessarily, right? Maybe not on the surface. Planning is wise. Preparation is often biblical. Proverbs celebrates the ant who stores food in the summer. None of that is a problem. The problem comes later, after the research, after the preparation, when very responsible lies awake at 2 a.m., running the scenarios again and again and again, when she can't fully enter into a moment of joy because she's already calculating what might go wrong next, when she snaps at her husband because he doesn't share her level of concern, when she quietly judges others for their carelessness, because surely their peace means they just haven't thought hard enough about what could happen. At that point, something has shifted. What started as prudence has changed into something else entirely. Well, welcome to Radiant Hope. I'm glad you're here for episode 2 of our series, The Quiet Sins That No One Talks About. Last time we talked about bitterness dressed up as discernment. And today we're talking about a sin that's even easier to miss because it wears a cardigan, right? It looks nice. It looks well put together. It carries a planner, and it gets praised in most church small groups. Today we're talking about anxiety, which has been baptized as just being cautious. Alright, so here's the move that anxious wisdom makes, and it's subtle enough that we need to look at it carefully. It goes to the book of Proverbs, which is genuinely full of counsel about planning ahead, thinking carefully, not being fools, and it mines those verses with great enthusiasm. The prudent sees danger and hides himself, Proverbs 22:3. Plans fail for lack of counsel, Proverbs 15:22. The wise store up choice food and olive oil, Proverbs 21:20. Good verses, right? True verses. And then, here's the move, right? Here's the little sidestep. It quietly skips the rest of the Bible. It skips Matthew 6, where Jesus says with very clearness, kind of bluntness, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on." He then says it again in verse 31, and again in verse 34. This skips Philippians 4:6, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." It skips Luke 12, where Jesus looks at the disciples and says, "Do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried." And he grounds that command not in a technique or a coping strategy, but in the character of the Father. Your Father knows that you need them. The anxious heart has a very selective Bible. It's like the Thomas Jefferson Bible. Here's the anxiety Bible. And this is where I want to introduce a concept that Thomas Watson wrote about. He described what he called the sin of practical atheism. Not the philosophical atheism of someone who denies God's existence, but the functional atheism of someone who believes the right things on paper and yet lives as if God were not there, or not trustworthy, or not quite in control of the details. He said the professed atheist says there is no God. The practical atheist lives as if there were none, making his own providence, trusting his own arm, lying awake as though the keeping of the world depended on his wakefulness. Think about that phrase for a second. Lying awake as though the keeping of the world depended on his wakefulness. That's one of the most precise descriptions of anxiety that we probably can encounter, right? Are you awake, lying awake, thinking that the world depends upon you? The anxious person is not, in their own mind, an unbeliever. They love God. They know the theology. They can quote Psalm 46. But in the dark at 2 a.m., when the scenarios are running, functionally, practically, they are the one holding everything together. God is nearby, but they are the ones keeping watch. Now, why does anxiety reach for Proverbs rather than Matthew 6? I think Jeremiah Burroughs put his finger on it when he wrote about what he called the discontented soul. He said, the discontented man has a feverish spirit. The meat that should nourish him becomes his disease. What God provides as comfort becomes the occasion of further anxiety because the heart refuses to let it be enough. Burroughs is saying something important. The anxious heart is not just afraid. It is actually at some level refusing something. It is refusing to let God's provision and God's promises be sufficient. It wants more certainty than God has offered. It wants to know what he has not disclosed. And when that certainty isn't available, it goes back to planning the research, the scenarios, because doing something feels better than resting in God, whose ways are higher than ours. We don't know his ways. So, I want to address a specific lie that I think is more prevalent in Christian culture than we'd like to admit. It's the lie that says, the more I worry, the more I care. And the more I care, the more faithful I am. This lie is especially powerful for parents, for leaders, for anyone with responsibility over others, because the logic almost sounds noble, doesn't it? Of course I'm anxious. I take this seriously. Only a negligent parent wouldn't be worried. Only a careless leader would sleep well at night. And we dress this up in the language of stewardship, right? God has entrusted me with these children, this ministry, this business. And I intend to take that seriously. Which sounds right. Which is right in its first sentence, right? Taking responsibility seriously is good. That's what you should do. You shouldn't be flippant about your responsibilities. But there is a step that gets quietly skipped. And it's this one. Taking something seriously does not require taking God out of it. Why do we do that? Well, Jonathan Edwards wrote in his own private journal, I have often found that the times I was most anxious were not the times I was most useful, nor most holy, nor most attentive to God. They were the times I was most trusted in, or turned in upon myself. The times I was most turned in upon myself, most convinced of my own indispensability. He's convinced of his own indispensability. That's not a sentence that you want to really listen to, right? It's uncomfortable. I don't know if I want to talk about how I feel I'm indispensable. Well, the theological problem here is with constant vigilance as a form of faithfulness, right? There's a we confuse those. Like I'm always watching. I'm always on alert. I'm always like on the edge of my seat, anxiety wise, and that just means I'm faithful, right? What that does though is it quietly relocates the sovereignty. Who's in charge? If my watchfulness is what stands between my family and disaster, then functionally, I'm the one who's sovereign over my family, not God. God is there perhaps, maybe as a backup, as something I'll appeal to if my vigilance fails, but the first line of defense is me. Psalm 127, 1 through 2 is about as clear as Scripture gets on this subject. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives sleep to his beloved. So he gives sleep to his beloved, not to the lazy, not to the careless, but to the beloved, to those who have learned to trust the one who does not sleep and who does not slumber. Now, I want to be very careful here because I know some people listening are walking through some hard things, right? And I'm not saying that anxiety is simply a failure of your willpower or that if you just believed harder, you wouldn't feel afraid. The Psalms are full of fear. Paul writes about his anxieties in 2 Corinthians. The human experience of anxiety is real and it's very complex. And for some people, it has a psychological, and there are sometimes there's a physical problem with you that might be causing that. So that's a good idea to get checked out. You get checked out by the doctors. If there's some kind of, physical problem with your brain or something like that, then that's a different story. And that deserves care, and that deserves attention. And hopefully there's things that they can do for you. But there is a form of anxiety that is specifically a spiritual posture, right? A practice habit of the heart, a chosen orientation toward the future that says, I do not trust what I cannot control. And I cannot truly rest until I have controlled as much as possible. Now that posture is what we're examining today. And William Perkins named it with his usual directness that he often writes about. He said, sinful care is a fruit of unbelief. The man who trusts God's promises will labor diligently and then sleep. The man who does not trust them will labor diligently, then lie awake, for he has never truly given the matter to God, only borrowed it in his own strength for a while. There's something in the way he phrases that this hits, right? It goes beyond just trust God, right? Because it acknowledges the effort. It acknowledges the work that the person is doing. But it names what is usually missing. The actual transfer here. The genuine release. The moment where you put the thing down and don't pick it up again. That's what we're missing here. So how do we know the difference? Because prudence is genuinely good, right? Planning is genuinely good. Preparation is not a sin. Just lay that out there. The Bible doesn't say none of that. And I don't want to produce a different kind of guilt in people who are simply trying to be responsible. If you're trying to be responsible, that's one thing. But let me give you 4 marks of the difference between prudence and this sinful anxiety. Now, prudence has a finish line. Anxiety does not. Biblical wisdom looks ahead, makes a plan, takes the necessary steps, and then releases the outcome to God. It has a stopping point, right? Once you get to the place where, okay, the plan is made, boom, I'm done. That's it, right? I do the plan, and if it works out, good. If it doesn't, that's in the hands of God. And if it does work out, it's in the hands of God too. But anxiety is recursive, right? It keeps looping back over and over again. It finishes the plan and immediately begins auditing the plan. And then it wonders if the audit was sufficient. And then it wants to audit the audit. Prudence comes to rest. Anxiety cannot. So think about that. Are you constantly going back over this thing? You made a plan, you're going to do something, and then you just go back over it and go back over it again, over and over and over and over and over. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe, and you start freaking out over all the details. And even though you covered all the details already in the first plan, it's still missing something. There's your first sign. Here's the second one. Prudence is proportionate. Anxiety is not. The wise person calibrates their preparation to the actual risk. Anxiety calibrates its preparation to the worst imaginable outcome, and then usually goes one step beyond that. Now, Matthew Henry, the great commentator, noted that anxious care always travels in the company of exaggeration. That's funny. It makes the possible into the probable, and then the probable into the certain. Anxious care is a sin against God's fatherly provision, for it charges God with forgetting us or being unable to supply what he has promised. That's Matthew Henry in his commentary on Matthew chapter 6. Now, the third test I want to give you is that prudence produces peace after action. Anxiety produces guilt after rest. Here's a diagnostic you can apply tonight. When you stop planning, you stop doing the research, you stop working through the scenarios, do you feel peace or do you feel guilty? If the answer is guilty, if rest itself feels irresponsible, then that's not prudence. Prudence knows when to stop. Anxiety believes that stopping is really a moral failure, so it's going to keep going because it's like, oh, it's wrong if I don't stay vigilant on this. I got to keep going. I got to keep doing it. Do. You never go to God and say, God, I've made the plans. I've done all that I can. It's up to you. Anxiety won't do that. It might do that first, but then it's like, oh, got to take that back. I got to freak out about it. I got to hold it in my hand. I got to get it done. Maybe I just have to white knuckle it to get it done. And if that doesn't work, now what do I do? It keeps going around, right? So it has to have this idea of trust. I can trust the Lord with this. That's the next thing. Number 4, prudence operates from trust. That's what all these kind of underlying thing is, right? If it's a moral failure, well, it's because I shouldn't trust God in it. But you have to trust God in these things. So anxiety is going to operate from control. Okay, so a lot of people who are controlling also have high anxiety. And this is the deepest difference between prudence and anxiety. Prudence says, I will do what is wise and then trust the rest to a God who is wiser than me. Anxiety says, I will do what is wise and then try to do God's part too. That's what it says. That's what it does. John Calvin wrote, the peace of God which passes all understanding means a peace which surpasses all that our mind can conceive. It is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of God guarding the citadel of our heart, so that anxiety finds no foothold there. Is that true? That if God is in control, that anxiety will find no foothold? And it's not because the circumstances have been resolved. It's not because all the scenarios have been planned for, but because the heart has been garrisoned by a peace that does not originate in human management. It's not about us. It's ultimately about Him. So what do we do with all this? Well, first, I want to say this. God is not done with you because of your anxiety. He's not standing at a distance, arms crossed, waiting for you to get your worry under control before He'll be close to you. The same Jesus who said, do not be anxious, also said, come to me, all who are weary and burdened. He knows the terrain of the anxious heart. He's not repelled by it. But He does invite you gently and firmly to something different, to a different kind of life. The practice that Scripture points to is not trying harder not to worry. That's all it was. Just white knuckling your way into peace. So I just have to keep trying harder and harder. It's all up to me. I got to do this. Again, that's coming from your anxiety. No, it's what Philippians 4:6 says. In everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. The antidote to anxiety is not more information. It's not a better plan. It's not a specific prayer. It's not vague prayer. Specific prayer. Lord, I'm afraid of this particular thing. I am naming it to you. I am asking you to act. I'm choosing right now to thank you for what you are, even before I see how it resolves. Right? That's the specific prayer they want. It's not the vague prayers. It's specific prayer, isn't it? Naming the specific thing, whatever it is. I'm asking God to act. I'm choosing right now to thank Him for whatever happens. Because however it resolves, He's in control. So that practice, repeating it, doing a particular specific prayers, grateful prayers, is really how the anxious heart begins to be retrained. Not overnight, not perfectly, but it's heading in the right direction. Richard Sibbes wrote, he that can go to God with all his fears, little and great, and spread them before him as Hezekiah spread the letter, that man has already begun to be healed. for he has found, however dimly, where the weight must go. That is what we are learning here. Slowly, in small acts of release, putting the planner down, right? Maybe you need to close the laptop, turn off the news over there, and saying with whatever faith we can muster in that moment, you are God, I am not. And that is the best news. Now, if you've recognized yourself anywhere in this conversation, maybe you're very responsible. Maybe you are her. Maybe you're very responsible in that 2 a.m. scenario runner, in the person who feels guilty when they're at rest. You're in good company, actually. You're not beyond the reach of a Father who gives sleep to his beloved. He is the God of radiant hope, even at 2 in the morning. Even when everything seems to be flying apart, he is there. All right, well, that's the end of our podcast for today. Until next time, walk humbly, think biblically, and rest in the steady hope that God provides.